And it's for this reason that governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just power from the people. And if they don't use that power properly, it is the duty of the people to overthrow such a government and to institute another one. So the right of the people to change a government is always there. And there is this assumption, I don't support coup d'etats. I believe that soldiers belong to the barracks. But soldiers are also citizens. And to expect that they are going to be neutral, even when pain is being visited against the people, is to delude oneself. So if you want soldiers to remain in the barracks, the civilians must conduct themselves. And there is a history of soldiers who have saved their countries. Ask the Ghanaians. Coup d'etats were as frequent as breakfast in Ghana before Jerry Rawlings came in. In Nigeria, coup d'etats were as frequent as breakfast before Olusegun Obasanjo came in and stabilized. In Rwanda, before the advent of Paul Kagame and the RPF, it was the same thing. In Uganda, you saw that with the advent of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. In Ethiopia, before the advent of Meles Zenawi. So there is a sense in which one cannot do what these Westerners are telling us, that this is the way to conduct yourself. And you know now, as I speak to you, there is a crisis in Belarus.
This is the journey to one Africa.
I saw an online petition where they were pushing for you to go and join the African Union. I don't know if you saw it, but if you didn't.
What we need is resolve. What we need are champions of this process. This idea that some people came from Europe and took people's farm and then they are to be compensated. You know, if a thief comes into your house and removes you out of your house and then furnishes your house and then you remove him, how do you compensate the thief? This is exactly what we are being told. The situation is so clear. I mean, you came into Africa, you own 80% of the land. What is independence? Land is the last colonial question. If you have 10,000 acres of land, you've got to give up some of it. One of the problems in Africa is the tendency of African leaders to overstay in power. The people are getting restless because we have a crop of leaders who think that they are demigods. And I'm one who will support the people when they rise against these demigods who suffer from the Martyr complex and the Jehovah complex.
Africa is working towards collective prosperity, Pan-Africanism, and African Renaissance. A master plan known as Agenda 2063 had to be put in place to help establish, reposition Africa as a dominant player in the global arena. This is the African Passport Show, where we seek to popularize this mission. I'm your host, Godfrey Mr. G. Madanire, and today we are hosting a true Pan-Africanist, vocal intellectual, who draws inspiration from heroes such as Thomas Sankara, Professor Patrick Lodge Otiana Lumumba. Welcome to the show, Prof.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Awesome. Africa is working towards Agenda 2063, and we know that this came about because the leadership came together and decided this is the master plan. But they can only achieve it if they work together with people on the ground. How can we ensure that people on the ground understand and work together with the leadership to achieve these objectives?
Thank you very much. That is a question that is very significant, particularly at this time in the history of Africa, and it must be seen in a historical context. Historical context because when the first wave of countries regained their independence in the 1960s, preceded, of course, by Ghana in 1957, the drive of the founding fathers was that we would work as a team in order to improve the quality of the lives of the people in health, in agriculture, in education, and all sectors of life. The of those leaders was captured much more dramatically by Kwame Nkrumah in 1963 in the month of May in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, when he exhorted the leaders present, the 32 of them, that in order to achieve our declared goal of economic emancipation, we had to work as a team. Of course, he did not carry the day, and we ended up with a very loose organization known as the Organization of African Unity, which played its role. Its detractors described it as a toothless bulldog. Ultimately, it transitioned into the African Union, which was meant to be a little better in the manner in which it interacted with the man and woman in the villages and hamlets of Africa and in the other parts of the continent, which begs the question, which is the question that you posed: what can it do in order to have a presence in the hearts and minds of people? The truth is that if you ask 10 Africans about the African Union, perhaps only 2 or 3 at the very best understand what it is or what it does. And that is an indictment of the African Union and her leadership. It means that it has remained really an ivory tower, and in the minds of many, a talking shop, which brings together African leaders once every year in what is essentially an annual jamboree of speechifying without much. But going forward, I think the leaders recognize this as the organization's Achilles heel. And the Agenda 2063 is indeed an acknowledgement that the first 50 years of independence or the creation of the OAU were not a success, and that going forward, the next 50 years ought to be used judiciously in order to resolve the problems which ought to have been resolved a little earlier. So that is the grand plan. That is the mission. That is perhaps the vision. The question is, beyond the rhetoric, is something happening on the ground? And perhaps it would be useful if you led me into a question that would allow me to answer that question a lot more pointedly.
Absolutely. You know, I really appreciate your input, Prof. And I agree with you. A lot of people, when you talk to them about the African Union, it's something that is very foreign to them. And yet, they are supposed to be very much aware of the going-ons of, you know, what is happening in the African Union. Because at the end of the day, those leaders are there to save us, people on the ground. Now, the African Union also established some regional blocks to help them achieve different objectives, because they realize that different units can only help the bigger vision, you know, to come into fruition. So we have other regional blocks such as ECOWAS, SADC, COMESA, etc. How effective can we make these regional blocks, you know, help us achieve our set objectives?
Let me set something straight. It's not the African Union that created these regional blocks. These regional blocks are blocks that were created by the individual countries for purposes initially of taking advantage of unity for economic reasons primarily. The East African Community, you remember that the East African Community was created in the 1960s. It collapsed and was revived again in 1999. And it brings together Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. And I now know that the Democratic Republic of Congo would want to join in. So that is one bloc whose declared agenda is to create a common market, to have free movement of goods, and ultimately a political union, including a monetary union. The same is evident in SADC, which I believe has a membership of 16 countries. That is also true of ECOWAS with a membership of 14 countries. There are also others like COMESA, like IGAD, like the Central African, and of course the Maghreb. And one can say a number of things about these regional bodies, sometimes referred to in the abbreviated term REX. If you look at some of them, let's look at ECOWAS. ECOWAS has made certain useful contributions in that region. You remember when there was a problem in Liberia, it was under the aegis of ECOWAS that ECOMOG was created, and that did stabilize Liberia. We saw recently when President Yahya Jammeh of the Gambia wanted to remain in power, it was indeed once again the ECOWAS which came out very strongly and forced him into exile in Equatorial Guinea. And a lot more currently we have seen when there was, people call it a coup, but I belong to the school that says that it was a people revolution, which was concluded by the military. And ECOWAS, through the diplomacy of the former president of Nigeria, Goodluck Jonathan, have been trying to mediate a settlement. And we have seen, of course, that President Keita has been released from detention through that effort. One can see that. And in the economic front, we also know that there was a proposal to create a currency called the ECO, which has been hijacked by the French through the agency of Alassane Ouattara of Cote d'Ivoire. So one can see that there are very deliberate efforts in that regard. And one is not saying that there are no problems, but one can see positive steps. If you come to the SADC region, you also see the dominance of South Africa in that economy and the efforts that have been made to cushion countries, even in matters of conflict such as Lesotho. And we see, even as I speak now, the SADC has been quite involved. I wish they could be more involved in the conflict that is raging in northern Mozambique. And I wish they could be a lot more involved in the problems that are going on in Zimbabwe. Those are some of the weaknesses that one sees. When you come to East Africa, I think East Africa on paper should be the more integrated, because East African community was a lot older than any of these economic blocks. And one can see the removal in the economic front of tariff and non-tariff barriers, the movement of people, and Rwanda must be praised in this regard, because Rwanda has eliminated the whole regime of work permits. That is to be commended. Central Africa has been a little weak, and we know why. We know that with an unstable Democratic Republic of Congo, and of course Central African Republic, and in the Sahelian region, we have seen there the problems in countries such as Niger, Burkina Faso, Mauritania, and those countries have not allowed the regional body to be very robust. In the Maghreb, we have seen a little weaknesses, because Morocco at one time even left the African Union and applied to be a member of the European Union. And then, of course, the instability with the advent of the Arab Spring, the instability in Tunisia, and then in Egypt, and the debacle that we now have in Libya, there has been a problem. So one sees regional bodies that are not working at full throttle. One would want to see more robust regional bodies. But I now see, with the handing over of the office to African Continental Free Trade Area by the president of Ghana, Nana Dankwa-Addo Akufo-Addo, on the 17th day of August, to Wamkele Mene and Mahamat Faki, that is a new beginning. So that when one looks at SCFTA, there are prospects there, but there are going to be challenges. And to me, that does not worry me at all. If you look at what has happened with the NAFTA that involved the United States, Canada, and Mexico, you can see that it's never easy. If you go to the Asian countries, you've also seen the problems. We've seen the problems within the European Union culminating in what is popularly known as the Brexit. So conflict is permanent, is our ability to resolve those conflicts in an agreeable manner that then defines who we are. And I think that Africa is now in a good space, not to repeat the same mistake that we have seen made within the European Union, or made in NAFTA, or made in the Asian countries. What we need is resolve. What we need are champions of this process. And I know that there are elders, champions in this process, such as Olusegun Obasanjo, Jerry Rawling, Joaquim Chissano, Johnson Sirleaf, and such leaders who are trying their best to augment the processes that are in place. So on a scale of 1 to 10, give us 5, which is not bad. This is a pass rate, but I think we can do better.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's encouraging to know that you are giving us a 5 out of 10. And Prof, you mentioned in passing the issue of coups that we see happening throughout the continent. Sometimes they want to call it a mutiny. Sometimes they want to call it a coup that is not a coup. You also mentioned the Arab, uprisings. It seems this is slowly becoming our solution to our current problems. What are your comments on this kind of culture?
Not at all. If you look at the recent history of Africa, there are no coups. I mean, if you compare, and permit me to do this, if you look at the history of Africa immediately after independence, you will see that there were very many coups, quite a number of them which were instigated from outside. Look at the first, what one may describe as the first coup in 1961, barely 9 months after the Democratic Republic of Congo regained her independence. Patrice Emery Lumumba was removed from power and assassinated. And remember that Patrice Emery had actually invited the UN, and he was done in by the Belgians and the Americans. Then 2 years later, Sylvanus Olympio was removed. And we had a series of these coup d'etats. 1966, the removal of Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah. 1967, we saw the removal of Nnamdi Azikiwe and Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. Then we see the removal of Modibo Keita in Mali. And we have a series of coups. You then have in Congo, we have coups in Togo, we have coups, attempted coups in Guinea-Conakry, although they did not remove that time Ahmed Sékou Touré. We see in the Gambia an attempt, in fact, successful coup to remove Dawuda Kairaba Jawara. You come to, in 1960s, there are mutinies in all East African countries. There is a mutiny in Kenya, mutiny in Uganda, mutiny in Tanzania. Of course, they don't succeed in Tanzania, but you see the removal of Obote in Uganda. And then you go to the Sudan, you see the coup, the removal in 1974 of Haile Selassie, and ultimately the removal of the Deg regime and the emerging of the guerrilla movements of Meles Zenawi and Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, and post-genocide of Paul Kagame. But if you look at the situation post-1989, and there is the African Charter on Democracy and Governance, which was designed, I think it was in Eswatini that this was made, that we will not allow coup d'etats or unconstitutional means as the basis of changing government. But there is a sense in which the leaders that emerged post-Berlin Wall, post-1989, some of them started misconducting themselves. And let's go to the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring starts very innocently. A young boy who is a graduate, has no opportunities. He immolates himself, and there is a sweep of activities. Egypt, Hosni Mubarak is gone. We come to Tunisia, the leadership is removed out there. Of course, they don't succeed with Bouteflika in Algeria. Muammar al-Gaddafi is gone, and Libya has never been the same again. But let us look at the conduct of the leaders post that era. Look at the conduct of al-Sisi. He's become a dictator in the same way that Hosni Mubarak was. Look at people like the now removed Omar el-Bashir. You go to Burkina Faso after they assassinated Thomas Sankara and the behavior of Blaise Compaoré, who himself is then removed. And you go to Cote d'Ivoire, Alassane Ouattara removes Gbagbo, but see his conduct now. And you go to Guinea-Conakry and the conduct of Alpha Condé, and go to Guinea, rather to Gabon, the conduct of Bongo Ondimba. You go to Equatorial Guinea, you see how the Ngwemas are behaving. And you go to Central African Republic, you see the conduct of Bozize. You go to Eritrea, you see the conduct of Isaias Afwerki. So, and I don't have the time to go through each one of the countries. So those examples suffice. So there is an emergence of leaders who do not want to leave power. So that when you see the people expelling Blaise Compaoré, it is the people rising. When you see the people removing Boubacar Keïta, they were in the streets for 1 month. So what the soldiers did is to run away from Keïta and to join the people. That's why I don't call it a coup d'etat. You go to Zimbabwe, the people had risen against Mugabe, and the soldiers simply came and concluded the thing. So this is happening because we have this emerging crop of leaders, and there are quite a number of them. I've already mentioned people like Ondimba. If you go to Nasingde Eyadema, Fore Eyadema in Togo, or I've already mentioned Alpha Condé, Alassane Ouattara, and that kind of leaders, then you've got the people rise. And I think I love the opening words of the American Declaration of Independence, which I'll repeat only a portion of it, that we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it's for this reason that governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just power from the people. And if they don't use that power properly, it is the duty of the people to overthrow such a government and to institute another one. So the right of the people to change a government is always there. And there is this assumption, I don't support coup d'etats, I believe that soldiers belong to the barracks, but soldiers are also citizens. And to expect that they are going to be neutral, even when pain is being visited against the people, is to delude oneself. So if you want soldiers to remain in the barracks, the civilians must conduct themselves. And there is a history of soldiers who have saved their countries. Ask the Ghanaians. Coup d'etats were as frequent as breakfast in Ghana before Jerry Rawlings came in. In Nigeria, coup d'etats were as frequent as breakfast before Olusegun Obasanjo came in and stabilized. In Rwanda, before the advent of Paul Kagame and the RPF, it was the same thing. In Uganda, you saw that with the advent of Yoweri Kaguta Museveni. In Ethiopia, before the advent of Meles Zenawi. So there is a sense in which one cannot do what these Westerners are telling us, that this is the way to conduct yourself. And you know now, as I speak to you, there is a crisis in Belarus, inside of Europe. So there is a sense in which it is not true that coup d'etats are there. The people are getting restless because we have a crop of leaders who think that they are demigods. And I'm one who will support the people when they rise against these demigods who suffer from the Martyr complex and the Jehovah complex.
And Prof, you know, there is this tendency of breaking away countries. We've seen it happen in Sudan, where they ended up dividing the country. Right now in Zimbabwe, there is a referendum, there is a petition where they are asking the government to divide Matabeleland so that it can stand on its own. We've also read in the media, I think a few years ago, South Africa, they were suggesting that they needed that part to stand on its own. Do you think that is a solution to problems that African countries are facing?
You know, let me take you back to history. When the OAU was founded in 1963, there are those who actually suggested that we should redraw the colonial boundaries. And it is, I think, and I stand to be corrected on this, that Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Kambarage Nyerere and Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, who took the view in those very early days that we retain the inherited boundaries, because if we were to begin to unpack them, there'd be too many conflicts. And I think it is the following year in Cairo that they came up with the doctrine of the inviolability of inherited boundaries. The idea was that we could create states where people had cultural and linguistic diversity, but we could make the best of it. In fact, it is for this reason that Kwame Nkrumah was agitating for one Africa, so that we don't have these problems, because the boundaries drawn in Berlin in 1884 and 85 were very arbitrary. So there is a sense in which that was done to preserve and to ensure that we immunize ourselves from conflict. The truth is that that did not happen, with the consequence that we have seen. Take, for example, the Cameroons. We know the history of the Cameroons. When La République was being established during the presidency of Ahmadou Ahidjo, Ahidjo told the former British that we were going to create a federation. And no sooner had he settled in power than he destroyed the federal structure. And when Paul Biya came, and we know what is happening, the genocide that is going on in Ambazonia as we speak, and Africa doesn't speak about it. And you know, for example, also in Nigeria, when the British were leaving, what they did was to put the North and the South together. And you only have to listen to the early writings, or listen to the early speeches of the Sultan of Sokoto, Ahmadu Bello, and some of his writings. He had no faith in Nigeria as a nation. He said to him there was Northerners and Southerners. And you can see, and I want you to read when you are talking about Nigeria, even the thoughts of Nnamdi Azikiwe and Obafemi Awolowo at that time. So that, and go to, you come to Sudan. Once again, the British, when they were departing, they combined the North and the South. The North was preponderantly Arab and Islam. And you see, therefore, that these were powder kegs. But I want, in answering your question, to refer you to what John Garang de Mabior said during the conflict with Sudan. He said, I want to be a part of a united Sudan, but let Khartoum make unity attractive. We cannot live in a united Sudan where we are second-class citizens with Arabo-Islamic ideologues like Al-Turabi, who believes that the Africans are inferior and that their entire enterprise is to Arabize and to Islamize Sudan. So you can see that people are forced into these velvet divorces simply because you have a leadership that is very myopic in the manner in which they conceive their countries. The same speech, if you look at Odumegwu and Gowon in 1967 during the civil war in Nigeria, the last meeting before the civil war broke out was in Aburi. And in Aburi, it was agreed that the Biafra situation would be dealt in a manner that would accommodate the interests of the Igbo. And Ojukwu then said that we agreed at Aburi. And he said, by Aburi we stand. And Gowon retorted by saying, and by Aburi you shall fall. So, and the Igbo are saying that really we have been punished because it is argued that it is us who instituted the coup in 1967 when Kaduna Nziogu was the mastermind of the coup, and then Aguiyi-Ironsi. And the question is Abuja attractive to the Igbo? When you come to the Cameroons, is the same thing. Is Yaoundé attractive to the government of Ambazonia in Boya? And if you look at Ethiopia and Eritrea, when Meles Zenawi came into power, he decided that there should be a velvet divorce, and that is how you ended up with Eritrea. You come to Somalia, you now have British Somaliland and the Italian, and you have an unrecognized government in Hargeisa. So Khartoum, or rather Hargeisa and Mogadishu are not seeing eye to eye. So you've got to look at all these things in context. So I also haven't talked about the Democratic Republic of Congo, the initial rebellion of Moise Chombe with the Katanga rebellion, and all these things. And if you go to Namibia, you know the problem with the Caprivi Strip. And in Zimbabwe, you have talked about it a lot more directly because Gukuruhandi, you remember the 1985, I think, the 1980s activity, 5th Brigade of the Mugabe regime that was targeted against Joshua Nkomo. And in the eyes of the Ndebele, it was also an affront to the Ndebele. So the Ndebele take the view that the Shona are treating them like second-class citizens. So all these things must be seen in context. But what is my position? My position is very clear, that a united Africa is what we should aim at. And that these countries and these regions, what people are looking for is justice and fairness. When there is injustice and there is unfairness, people think that they can do better when they are alone. But remember, once you begin to look at the things that divide you, you will be divided until you are very family. And I think that that is the path not to take. If we could improve governance, it would be a very good thing. If you can improve governance and allow everybody to participate in the civic activities of the nation, then a united Africa, which I look forward to, you can then have these administrative units. They will not matter. In the 1984 Ethiopian constitution, Meles Zenawi and his group created in the constitution a possibility of based on ethnic nationality. And it can be done. Africa can be a confederation with a very loose center, and the confederal units can then function very differently, like they do in Switzerland, which is a small country, where you have a role for traditional rulers, you have a role for government. Because, let me conclude my answer by posing a rhetorical question. Why do we need governments at all? We need governments for the purpose of utilizing our taxes for our general good. And what is our general good? Our general good is that we want good infrastructure. Our general good is that we want to trade. Our general good is that we want to be engaged in agriculture. We want good education. We want good health. We want opportunities for young innovate and invent to be employed. We want opportunities. The pursuit of happiness, and I think happiness has been defined. It is to pursue that which makes you happy as a member of a society. Because when you are a member of a society, you must also surrender some of your interests and rights. So even as you pursue your happiness, you must remember that you are not living in an island. And if governments were to achieve that, if we pay taxes and all these things are done unto us, you would not care whether you are Ndebele or Shona or Ovambo or Ovimbundu or Wolof or Temne or Mende or Kikuyu or Batetela or Abakongo. You would not care. The reason why we care and talk about all these things is because opportunities have been denied us. If everybody has the opportunity, the Igbo would not care about their Igbo-ness except for cultural reasons. The Ibibio would not care about their being. The Akan and the Ebe would not care except for cultural reasons, because there is equal opportunity. We'd be speaking for and in favor of. Long answer to a short question, but necessary nevertheless.
Thank you very much, Prof. And you mentioned the issue of governments, and something came to my mind. Recently in Malawi, we had elections and a new government came into power. In the Gambia, in 2017, Adam Barrow made a promise that he's getting into power and he'll only run for about 3 years, and after that he'll let it go. In 2017 November, we also had President Mnangagwa coming into power. We also had in South Africa President Ramaphosa promising the new dawn. In Zambia, we have President Edgar Lungu, who just appointed a new governor for the Reserve Bank, replacing the old one, and people are disillusioned, they're disenchanted, they're disenfranchised, and this is a very common feeling in African politics. People are promised a lot of things when our leaders come into power, only to be disappointed and feeling betrayed thereafter. What advice would you give them?
Perhaps not advice, but just my thoughts. The bad examples stick like a sore thumb, but it is true that there are also countries where a culture of peaceful changeover of power has been taking place. But let me address your question first. Democracy, by its very nature, requires the eternal vigilance of the population. If the population is not vigilant, history has demonstrated that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is the dictum of Lord Acton, and it has been demonstrated many times. So if the people are not vigilant, people are liable to abuse power. We have seen promises being made. We have seen Alassane Ouattara in Côte d'Ivoire saying that he would only serve during the period that the constitution allowed. Then he changes the constitution and now wants to run a third time. We have seen that in Guinea-Conakry with Alpha Condé. We saw that with Blaise Compaoré in Burkina Faso. We saw that with Bouteflika in Algeria. It is a bad habit. And you've seen it even with Lungu in Zambia. And you've seen it with Mnangagwa, who took over from Robert Mugabe in very difficult circumstances, and people thought that he would now introduce a new dispensation. Now everybody is disappointed, at least everybody who is sane thinks that he's running a bad administration. We saw that with Professor Patrick Wamutharika in Malawi. This is a man who is exposed, and see how he behaved. He stole an election. And of course, when people went out and people were vigilant, Chakwera won the election. And I hope that Chakwera is going to remain true and faithful to his promises. He will only do so if people are vigilant. We've seen that have the tendency of the people to want to stay in power. My very good friend Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, when he was in 1986, when he was seeking power, said, one of the problems in Africa is the tendency of African leaders to overstay in power. Then he was interviewed and he said people should leave power at 75 because at 75, both physically and intellectually, they begin to degenerate. Now he says people should stay in power for 96 years. Well, I'm up to 96 years. So you can see there is a problem there. And once again, I must say it is the eternal vigilance of the people that will let these people leave. I told you, in many African countries, the people you see who don't want to leave power are part of the independence struggle movement. So you see a number of political parties in Africa which are freedom-fighting movements struggling to be political parties. ZANU-PF is suffering from that. It is struggling to be a political party, but it has not transited in that way. The NRA, NRM in Uganda is suffering in that way. SPLA, SPLM in South Sudan is struggling. It has not quite become a political party. Even the army is national, but sees itself as cadres of the political party. And I think that that is problematic. But there are good examples that we must not forget. Sam Nujoma, when he became the president of Namibia, he served his 2 terms. And once he finished, Hifikepunye Pohamba served, and now Hage Geingob is the president. It means a culture has been established. We have seen that in Botswana with President Saserese Khama. We have seen that with Ketumile Masire. We have seen that with Festus Mogae. And we have seen that with Ian Khama. And we now have Mosisi. You now can see that there is a culture and a tradition. In Tanzania, we saw Julius Kambarage Nyerere, we saw Mzee Ali Hassan Mwinyi, we saw Benjamin William Mkapa, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, and now John Joseph Pombe Magufuli. There is a culture that has been happening there. In Kenya, there is a sense in which we also have established that tradition, so that you had Jomo Kenyatta, Daniel Moi, and Mwai Kibaki, and Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta. He has no choice. When his term expires, there is no possibility that he'll remain in office. And I think that we should also give these good examples in order to encourage and recent developments in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Because of pressure, we saw that President Jose Kabila left, and we now have Tshisekedi. And in West Africa, we have seen that tradition with John Kufuor. We have seen now we have Nana Dankwa Addo Akufo-Addo. We have also seen that even in Nigeria with the departure of Obasanjo and Goodluck Jonathan, and now Buhari. We have seen that even in Sierra Leone. We have seen that in Liberia from Johnson Sirleaf to Jojo Pongwea. And there is a sense in which one sees some kind of development. Benin with President Patrick Talon, and in Senegal, Macky Sall, and even you talked about the Gambia. Of course, Adama Barrow came after Jammeh had misbehaved, and we hope that Adama is going to behave decently. In Mauritania. So if you want to count the countries one by one, you'll be amazed that indeed the positives are more than the negatives. Absolutely. And therefore we should use these positives to talk about Africa rather than to define ourselves negatively. I think we are doing better than Central Africa. We are doing better than quite a number of Asian countries. The momentum must be kept, and civic awareness of the people is what is going to tip the things in the right direction. So I'm one who remains guardedly optimistic, but optimistic nevertheless.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the issue of Zimbabwe, and something came into my mind again. Recently, they resolved to compensate farmers for developments on their dispossessed land. What are your views? Are they reversing the land reform program?
In fact, I have a statement here that was released, I think, yesterday by the Minister for Finance of Zimbabwe. You know, Zimbabwe is, in my view, and I stand to be corrected, I think the single thing that I think President Mugabe did, which I support, although it was a little disorderly, is to seize farms. You know, this idea that some people came from Europe and took people's farm, and then they are to be compensated. You know, if a thief comes into your house and removes you out of your house, and then furnishes your house, and then you remove him, how do you compensate the thief? This is exactly what we are being told. But I know Zimbabwe is being persuaded by the Western world that if you don't compensate our cousins, we are going to ensure that you suffer under sanction. You imagine what would happen if the Zimbabweans started compensating their farmers. They would be sending a wrong message to the white farmers in South Africa. They would be sending a wrong message to the white farmers in Namibia, because the situation is so clear. I mean, you came into Africa, you own 80% of the land. What is independence? Land is the last colonial question. And I don't think that anybody should be compensated. In fact, they have compensated themselves. They have worked this land for many years. Whatever compensation that they wanted, they have done so by engaging in commercial agriculture and deriving the profits therefrom. And if you check any of these farmers in Zimbabwe, in Namibia, in South Africa, half of their wealth is not in Zimbabwe or South Africa or Namibia. The Germans in Namibia, their wealth is in Germany, quite a good chunk of it. The Zimbabweans, their wealth is either stored in the United Kingdom, which is not so united anyway, and then some of it is to be found in New Zealand and in Australia. The South Africans are the same. Some of them are now in Canada. So the countries where they are actually hunting grounds. I'm one who believes, like my friend Selo Malema and George Shivambu and others, acquisition without compensation, but in an orderly manner. Because what we don't want to do is to disrupt agriculture. This is what happened in Zimbabwe. I don't want the farms in Cape to be taken away in a disorderly manner and to destroy the wine industry. It can't be done. And let me also be a little bit, I don't want to sound rabid. I think there are some whites in South Africa and even in Namibia who have demonstrated by their conduct that they are now Africans. And in my view, such whites ought to be accommodated, but they should only be accommodated if they behave. If you have 10,000 acres of land, you've got to give up some of it.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And you've got to transfer technology and know-how to the blacks. That must be done. But don't compensate anybody, not even a single cent. Not even a single cent. They don't deserve it. They are thieves who came and furnish your house. When you have expelled them, they now say, compensate me.
Compensate me.
How can you compensate a thief? Compensate thieves?
That's a very interesting analogy there, Professor. Lastly, I know as we try to build a prosperous African continent, we have a lot of Africans and a lot of people who are also interested in the success of Africa, but they're in the diaspora. How can we get them involved in the process?
You will repeat the question. Oh, yeah, you've talked about the diaspora.
Yes, Prof.
You know, Africa is divided into 5 distinct regions. And I'm happy that the African Union has now recognized Africans in the diaspora as the 6th region. We have nearly anything between 250 to 300 million people of African origin outside of the mother continent. You have them in the Caribbean, in Barbados, in Barbuda, in St. Kitts and Nevis, in Belize. You have them in Brazil. You have them in Honduras. You have them in North America, in Canada and the United States. You have them in Australia. You have them in Europe. These are people who ought to be involved in the activities of the mother continent. These are people, some of whom have know-how and resources. So our governments and the African Union must make a deliberate effort to work with these individuals so that they have the opportunity to share their exposure and know-how and resources with the mother continent. And that is why I was very happy with President Nana Dankwa-Addo Akufo-Addo of Ghana when last year he came up with what he described as the year of return, where he was encouraging people of African origin to come back to Ghana specifically. But I believe that was only the first move. They should come back to Africa. And when they do so, they need not physically relocate, not at all, because African Americans are the ones who created America. So that is as much their land as indeed Africa is their mother continent. And I think deliberate efforts must be made. I talked with a good number of African Americans and other Africans in the diaspora. They want to establish banks. They can. They have the resources. They want to be involved in mining. They want to be involved in the construction of airports. There is not a single sector, whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's in innovation, in the fourth industrial revolution arena, where they can't be involved. But governments must make deliberate efforts. There must be taxation regimes, or there must be citizen regimes which are re-examined so that we literally entice them back into the mother continent for purposes of contribution. And I'm very happy with some of my friends who I know, some of them like my good friend Rosenthal in the United States of America, such as Arikana Chihombori Pao, who is originally from Zimbabwe, and married in Ghana, who are already organizing themselves in a very unique way. And you remember, this idea of African unity and African in the diaspora is not a new one. Marcus Garvey had started this in the meetings that involved people like Marcus Garvey, people like W.B. Du Bois, even people like Malcolm X, people like Luther King, people like Ralph Abernathy, quite a number of them that were involved. Sojourner Truth, these are people who believed that we ought to work as one united group in order to grow the mother continent. And I think that is going to happen. That is one of the beautiful things that COVID has done, that COVID has made us realize the world is not full of good Samaritans. The world is full of bad Samaritans. And that these bad Samaritans' only claim to fame is that they want to be parasitic upon your resources. These bad Samaritans must be exposed and expelled so that we have our own good Samaritan. In fact, our good Samaritanism is ourselves. The beauty is, to paraphrase these words of Luther King, the beauty is that we can now truly pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. This time round, we are boots.
Before I let you go, Professor, a couple of weeks or months ago, I saw an online petition where they were pushing for you to go and join the African Union. I don't know if you saw it, but if you didn't,
I did. I did. And
how did you feel about that?
And I know that my good friend Arikana Chihombri is contesting for the chair of the African Union, and I support. But I will not myself seek to be the deputy, because for good reason, because I think I know how African governments work. And I suspect that African governments as governments have already made a decision to give Faki Mahamat a second term. Why do I think so? When Ibn Chambers of Ghana said that he wanted to contest, he was forced or made to withdraw, and ECOWAS said, we are now supporting Faki for a second term. So you can see those shenanigans and those machinations of African countries is now, you scratch my back and I scratch my back. So somebody like me, who possibly will not be endorsed by any other government, will be seen simply as an irritant and will not be given the fighting chance of a snowball in hell. So I don't want to be naive, but I think that the candidature of Arikana Chihombri Kwao is useful for a number of reasons. If she succeeds, well and good. But even if she does not, it will be sending a message to the African Union that we do not like the method that you use to choose the chair of the African Council. The people want to be involved. And I think that is how I see it. But I believe that even if we are outside of the African Union, we'll still contribute with greater freedom in the quest for making Africa to realize our potential.
Absolutely. On that note, I want to thank you very much, Professor Lumumba, for being part of this show. I believe I'll end up with a quote, and I'm going to quote you. Very interesting. You once said, I believe that we have reached a stage in life in the economic development of Africa where moving forward is perilous, moving backwards cowardice, and standing still is suicidal. But we must persevere because winners do not quit and quitters never win.
Indeed.
You were really talking about momentum and movement as we move forward. And also Kwame Nkrumah said something in that direction. He says, we face neither east nor west. We face forward. And your hero, Thomas Sankara, said, we must dare to invent the future. Thank you very much, Professor Lumumba, for being part of this show.
Said that sometimes in order to achieve, you must do things that observers think are mad. But when madness is orderly, it is the key that opens great doors.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much for those wise words, Professor. And we really appreciate you spending time with us.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
This is the journey to One Africa.